Independent watchmaking is booming, but that's not necessarily the case in Canada. Today's guest is trying to change that. When I saw Bradley Taylor's latest release, the Ardea, I knew he'd be a great podcast guest. It's a time-only watch. It's got all of the classical sensibility that's very in vogue in independent watchmaking right now, but there's something about it that makes it completely his own. It's mostly defined by a retrograde seconds at 6 o'clock that snaps back to 0 once a minute. Almost every piece of it is handmade by Bradley in his workshop in Vancouver, Canada. He works all alone there every day, all day. Bradley set off on his own in 2020, but he went to watchmaking school in Locle, Switzerland in 2015. He gained certifications at Patek Philippe and worked in after-sales service and restoration for other brands before setting off on his own. In today's conversation, we talk about the Ardea, we talk about his journey to independent watchmaking, the challenges of being an independent watchmaker, especially in Canada, and we get some of his thoughts on the wider landscape for independent watchmakers, all of the high-end, expensive watchmaking that we like to talk about nowadays, and how he sees his work and his vision fitting in. Also, for those of you that have been listening to Unpolished as a podcast, it's being published now on YouTube as well. So head over to the Unpolished Watch YouTube channel, and you can also see the video of Bradley and I's conversation. Thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and subscribe, like wherever you are. Finally, today's episode is brought to you by The Escapement. The Escapement is a first-of-its-kind, collector-focused event designed for watch enthusiasts of all types. It might sound like a typical watch show, but it's a unique experience that will bring together a curated selection of the best brands in horology in a format you've never seen before. It's happening in Abu Dhabi from November 20th to 22nd. Check out the show notes and today's newsletter for more, and tickets are on sale now. Okay, let's get to my conversation with Bradley Taylor. Watchmaker Bradley Taylor, thanks for joining today. It's good to have you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Tony.
It looks like you're calling from the workshop in Vancouver, I imagine?
Yeah, exactly. Just by I'm going to not disclose my location. But yeah, yes, just by Vancouver. Sorry.
Are you we're going to get into the Ardea and your latest release here in a minute, but do you have other people that work with you there, or is it you're all alone?
Just me right now. Yeah.
Right now. Okay, we'll get into that a little bit more, but I want to start, the Ardea is your latest release, which is kind of the impetus for why I had you on, sort of a fully in-house produced watch that was announced in the last month or two, which is kind of where we'll wrap up and land the conversation here. But I want to start with sort of the origin story, I guess, for a few minutes, how a kid from Canada ends up going to Swiss Watchmaking School and then pursues their own independent brand sort of 10 years down the road. So let's start there, like the origin story with watches for you.
Yeah, I always had a fascination and kind of an excitement about something being on my wrist that looked cool. And I remember I bought like a $60 quartz watch off the internet when I was like 16, and I just fell in love with it. It was like Croton, I think.
Oh, sure.
And that like didn't really spark much, but I took it apart and never put it back together. And nothing really would happen for a few years until I had gone into community college for business and marketing, because throughout my life, I haven't been super happy with the level of bosses that I'd had in my previous jobs. So I figured I'd probably want to do my own thing at some point. And I took apart a Seiko Monster, and I couldn't believe there was no battery inside. And it blew my mind. It was the first time I'd used the word beautiful and actually meant it. And that's the most pedestrian of mechanical movements there could be, the 7S26. But that started something in me, and to this day is still burning. And it's just, I find watchmaking such a pure art. And so from that point, I took apart the watch, and then shortly after I tried looking for a school.
Before we move on, Seiko, something I imagine your appreciation for that brand and that watchmaker, it hasn't dissipated over these years. It's if only it's grown. Is that right?
Yeah, I love Seiko.
Yeah.
Whenever someone's just getting into watches, it's very likely Seiko. And if they have a little bit more money to spend, probably Grand Seiko. It's hard to compete with a manufacturer that's so I don't even know the right word to describe it, but there's a philosophy behind their production and their design and their commitment to actually manufacturing so much. Um, Even when you take apart their quartz watches, they make the batteries. It's like, it's just, they're a very impressive company.
Anything in particular, like from the watchmaking side of things, as a watchmaker, someone who thinks about the insides of the watch more than probably the average consumer who just buys a Seiko because they see it at Macy's or wherever people shop nowadays? Like anything there in particular that you probably appreciate that someone may not know who's just sort of buying it on the shelf, wearing it, enjoying it, etc.?
Not a whole lot. I don't really like working on them, to be honest. Back when I used to do
Oh, why not?
servicing, it's just, there's something about the way they go together. It takes a special mindset, and it's not really for me. Like I used to work on them a little bit. I can. I don't do a whole lot of service work anymore, but yeah, they're just very industrially produced, kind of what Rolex would have been back in the day, in many senses of like affordability, or not necessarily affordability, but robustness and production style.
So we left it off. You were looking at schools in Switzerland. What's it like the entrance examination process for someone, especially a foreigner like you, trying to get into a school like that?
Yeah, it was a complex process. I got my student visa 6 hours before my flight, and they wanted my middle school diploma. And so there was a big lead up to actually getting over there. Even getting into school was a considerable challenge. So you don't just apply and get into school. So I went for 21 days for a bench test. So for 21 days, they sat me at a bench, and one day they'd come with some drawings on a piece of paper and the dimensions and a file. And so not only did they want to see how my dexterity was, they also wanted to see how did I work. Did I blame my tools, or did I try to improve it on my own? So they effectively tried to break me for 21 days. Like one day they just gave me a big sheet of steel, and I don't know if you've seen a jeweler's saw before, but they have like the really thin blades with the large frame, and they break all the time. Like if you're not careful, and especially at that point, if you don't know what you're doing, they snap every 5 minutes. You put a little bit too much pressure or turn it just a bit too much. And so they told me to just cut through it. And I went through 40 blades in about 5 hours, just going crazy in this little room. But I showed them that I was serious, and getting through watchmaking school takes real commitment. There's like some ideas of what you have about what it will be before you go. But when you're actually there, there's a lot of repetition, and they really take each exercise and push you to the highest level they can.
I've talked to some watchmakers here that have gone to school in the States more so than in Switzerland, but they break it down into basically kind of like two categories, the micro mechanics, learning how to make things and fabricate things, and then the actual service of the watch, the actual watchmaking, I guess, in some terms, which is probably not the right way to describe it, but what someone like me would think of as servicing a watch. But I'm wondering, first of all, if that's how it's broken down in Switzerland, if one side or the other was more drawing to you?
Yeah, my school was a little bit interesting that way. So Henrik Corpella was the director of the school and my teacher as well. He created the school as a response to a lot of the schools kind of catering to the industry. So the big schools were getting rid of their micromechanics programs or making them a lot more efficient. So if they can get you through watchmaking school in a year and a half, and the company gets someone who can service watches, they're a lot happier than it taking 2.5 or 3 years. So with that said, the entire first year, we didn't touch a watch. It was just micromechanics, tool making, making all kinds of various tools for the job, and just getting an understanding of how to actually make parts out of metal before we ever got to actually touch anything finished or any watch parts.
Is it the case, I've heard this from people here in the States too, that micromechanics is the thing that gets left behind sometimes if we're trying to train more watchmakers more quickly? From your perspective, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if something like what's lost, if anything, when sort of we forget to teach future watchmakers about something like micromechanics and how to fabricate things from scratch?
Yeah, it's It's as fundamental as how you handle the parts with your tweezers. And it also teaches you respect. If you know how to make a part, you're much less likely to be careless when you're handling something that's well finished because you understand the work that it took. For me, it's kind of like, in a sense, paying your dues as a watchmaker. Not that it's not valuable to your knowledge, but it's part of a learning process of like, how do you handle a file? And a lot of watchmaking is tool making. So if you skip that basis, it's just a little bit less of a full understanding of the job. And of course, so big manufacturers will, and some of the larger schools will try to eliminate that because, like I said, if they can get someone through school 30% faster and with relatively the same skill set, they will.
After school, you went most notably to work at Patek Philippe, and I think you did after sales service at Patek Philippe. So can we talk a little bit about the next stage in your sort of career in watchmaking, what you learn in after sales service, what it taught you, and all of that type of stuff?
Yeah. So it was kind of funny because I somehow convinced my mom to loan me the money to go to watchmaking school. She had no idea what I was getting myself into. But when I came back to Toronto, I had 3 job offers. And one of them was for one of the largest service centers in Canada. And they were about to get their Patek Philippe contract to do authorized service for them. So shortly after I started there, they sent me off to Geneva for 1 month. And that's where they taught me their approach to servicing and kind of brought me through their whole process. And then obviously through the tests and everything else. It was a really challenging month.
Can you just talk a little bit more about like what it was like? What was challenging about it?
Yeah. So I went with Shanghai Schools group at the time. And that was a group of students that had already experience with all the movements. They knew what they were getting into, right? Like each new movement is like a new puzzle. And if you've serviced a movement before, it's like cooking a recipe. You already understand the process. So you have to imagine me, I'm landing there and I've never worked on any of these movements before. And I was pretty fresh out of school and it was a pretty big undertaking. I barely passed. It was really hard. Their standards are incredibly hard, and I really respect Patek Philippe for their after sales service program. I think they, in the industry, they're kind of the gold standard. They take encasing and just making sure you don't leave any trace very seriously. So basically, it would work like we do lessons on different sections, even learning about the history of the company. But then they'd also come and kind of watch me work and take notes. And it's a little bit stressful when you're in that environment because there's a lot of pressure on you to ideally go home with a passing grade. And, you know, the company I was working for at the time was also depending on me to get that so that they could, you know, start servicing their watches.
What's it like? I mean, it sounds like basically someone probably much more your seniors standing over you essentially in a white coat that says Patek Philippe on it or something, watching your every move. I mean, are you just shaking with tweezers in your hand for a month straight?
A little bit of that. The final test, I forget how many hours it took, but I counted 16 faults that they put into the movement. So one of the ways you'll test a watchmaker is to intentionally put issues into the movement that they have to find. So as you're inspecting how many other parts there might be in that movement, whether it's 150 or any number, you want to find little tiny flaws that might impact the watch's timekeeping or even just a visual flaw. And so I counted 16 different problems that they put into my movement. So you can imagine at the end of this whole month, it's all on this one test. And after you're done, you're like, okay, I need a beer. Yeah, it was, but like I said, I was able to meet the qualification and it was a really good experience.
Favorite and least favorite Patek movements to work on in after sales service?
I like the 215. I like the 240. I'm not a big
Those are
sports
kind of
guy.
for people who aren't, for people who might not know off the top of your head, 215, 240 are kind of the 80s, 90s, manual wind and then micro rotor movements respectively that they would know from the 3796, the 5,000 and on forth. I mean, they're still in the catalog today in some respect, right?
Yeah, especially like a Calatrava is like a 215 usually. And the 240 is what they also build on for a lot of their watches as well, like as a kind of base movement. I forget the ones I don't like working on, but there's a couple.
What makes the 215 and 240 so good to work on?
They're relatively simple. Something I don't like in movement construction that's not just unique to Patek is having like fiddly springs or assemblies that rely on some type of very adjustable amount of friction in the movement to be successful. The 315 is like that, for example, where you have a very thin spring that applies pressure. And it's very careful, and if you put too much, it can impact things, and not enough. Like one of the tests is actually to put a hand that has a specific amount of weight onto it and see how far it drops when you install it. So I'm not a huge fan of that type of movement construction in general. And this, like I said, doesn't just apply to Patek. I don't like things that require like kind of an ambiguous, not ambiguous, but like a tricky test to kind of see if it's within tolerance.
What's the most frustrating part of working for or servicing for a major retailer when they have a Patek Philippe account like that? Are there any things that are particularly frustrating for a watchmaker like you?
I'll answer that more broadly, which is what I think is frustrating about going to watchmaking school and then graduating and working in service is that you get into watchmaking because you want to make things, and servicing is by and large finding a problem, ordering a replacement, and installing it. And that's for me where I recognize that this wasn't a long-term option. Every watchmaker is different, and there's people who love servicing. I don't. Will I take on the occasional restoration job where I get to like remanufacture a spring for a 30s watch or something like that? Absolutely. But if it's just going and diagnosing a part, ordering the number, waiting for it to show up, and then replacing it, there's very little satisfaction to me, especially as someone who wants to express themselves. But yeah, there's definitely frustrations in any service center capacity. But by and large, I pretty quickly knew that the job after a few years like wasn't for me.
Well, it kind of bridges us naturally to the next stage in the career for you when you started your own, or you co-founded a brand with Burchell and Taylor was the name of the brand. You co-founded it at probably the worst time to start a watch brand. So can you tell us a little bit about like, first of all, the thought process of, I think you kind of just hinted at perhaps what it was about after sales service and being a watchmaker in that part of the world that made you want to make the jump into independent. But can you talk through it a little bit more?
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny to think about the different transitions the industry's made since I started my career, whether it was when I started that company or like the last few years, which have been pretty crazy. But yeah, so my former classmate, Charles, was working at Roger Smith, and then he moved back to Toronto, and we started talking and said, hey, let's, like, the time is now, let's start our own company. And we took an approach, which there's different approaches when you start your own company. You can say, hey, let's buy all the machinery, all the tooling, spend years making something and hope that people like it. Or we could work with partners in Switzerland, design something and get our idea off the ground and see if people are interested. And obviously there's a lot of benefits to that approach, which is you have movement reliability and you don't have to spend years prototyping and you don't have to make the massive investment in machinery and tooling and process upfront. So we worked with a bunch of really awesome companies in Switzerland like Locle and Danze Cadran and a dial maker for enamel dials. They're owned by Ulysse Darden now. And yeah, we started with the reference one and then updated that. And then COVID came around in 2020 and it became clear that we had to shut down the company. And the next model was mostly through the production process. So I made the decision at that point to put my name on the dial and continue forward on my own. And it was definitely a pivotal moment for me. I don't think I would have been able to not do watchmaking in my life, but there was a point where I was like, if I release this and I don't sell any, I don't know. I don't know how I'm going to also pitch this to my wife as as an option. And yeah, I finished the Paragon and then I released it and I sold out the 12 pieces I wanted to make in 6 weeks. And so I continued the journey. I rented out a small workshop in South Vancouver and started buying machinery and tooling for what would help me with what I'm doing now today.
Was this the scariest moment for you as like a watchmaker, entrepreneur, small business owner of this might not end up working for me because of what's happening in your own personal life and then like how the broader world and everything that's going on is impacting you too?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just asked for some clarification on that. You meant like the most recent release or the Paragon?
No, back 5 years ago now with the Paragon and sort of deciding to branch off and do it on your own.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I really like having like just operating on my own, especially creatively. It's really, really tricky how you manage influences on your creativity and design when you're producing something, especially if there might be investors or business partners. Um, you really want to be careful what factors influence your work. And there's things you might not even be cognizant of that can impact what you're creating.
What do you mean by that? Can you sort of unpack what you're saying a little bit more?
Yeah, if I jump forward a little bit, for example, the only way I was able to make the Ardea was with clients believing in me before I finished it. And you can imagine there's two different types of clients in that scenario. There's one who says, I trust you, like, let me know when it's ready. And obviously uh, my goal is to make the most beautiful thing I possibly can. But you can imagine if you also take on a client who starts saying, hey, could we change this? Could we kind of explore this? Those little factors and that pressure that can happen, I think can be quite negative to the development experience or creative mindset.
Can you talk a little bit more about just well, let's talk about what the Paragon was first as a watch. Explain it to people who might not know briefly, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, the Paragon, it's a little funny to think back because uh, I think if it was released today, it might not get any attention because there's just so much more time only.
Yeah, I want to talk about this. Yeah,
Yeah, that's come out. And so it's hard to put myself back in the mindset of when I designed it. It was kind of pushing away from enamel dials into guilloche and exploring patterns in a bit different ways. So one of the things I do with the Paragon is I use guilloche in the rihat as opposed to like in the center of the dial, which I thought was a really fun idea of kind of using the most embellished element just as a border. That's quite in the weeds on that, but I worked with Vaucher for the movement. I had at Comblamine, Carré dial company, made the dials, and then also did guilloche for the rotors in solid gold. And I wanted to make a watch you could wear anywhere as well, and that still had a lot of artisanal work. And a lot of the thought process then too is also to say, like, if I don't have this story of making everything by myself, can I design something that still resonates with people? And so I made the hands because no one would even consider the idea of making purple hands for me. I went to a bunch of different companies and they all were not interested. I understand why now. It's very difficult to make them. It's not a reliable process. You have to repeat it often 5 to 7 times per hand just to get an even purple temper. So the Paragon was that. It was a demonstration of, like, can I create something that collectors are interested in? Because I do think overall, I find some facets of independent watchmaking don't prioritize the design of the dial side as much as they do the movement side. And that's been something I've always tried to really focus on, is putting just as much time into the actual design and balancing of everything aesthetically as I do the actual manufacturing and engineering of the movement.
You've mentioned the Swiss suppliers you've worked with on both the movement side and the dial side. Can you talk a little bit more? I mean, sometimes we hear about the challenges of working with any number of suppliers. Like the Swiss industry can be hard to break into. I imagine this is especially the case for a Canadian, even though you went to watchmaking school there. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with that?
Yeah, it's not always easy. And you get used to writing follow-up emails all the time. And sometimes you try writing them in French, and sometimes you do English, but most of the time French, and you just hope they get back to you. It really is, at the scale that most small watchmakers work at, you are usually annoying to a supplier.
Yeah.
They get orders from the big companies for 500 cases or 1,000 cases, and you're there saying, hey, would you make me 25? Or would you make me 10? And just the process that they have to do with making drawings and setting up the machines, by the time that's done, it doesn't make any sense for them to help you out. Or not even help you out, but even, it's just not economically sensible. So you have to get lucky and hopefully build relationships with these companies for them to work with you. Complimint's a good example of a company who's like happy to make a few dials for you. I don't think it's possible anymore. I don't know if we're taking on clients anymore, but there are small artisanal companies that are used to that style of production. But there's a couple things like the cases and typically for hands. And it's very difficult to find companies that not only do good work, but will also work with you.
Was your experience with that what prompted you to eventually realize that you wanted to do things the way you've done them with the Ardea, which is to say, like, developing more in-house capabilities?
Yeah, there's a variety of reasons. One is I'm no longer placing my stress on hoping a supplier delivers on time. It's now on me. And I much prefer that. It hasn't become less stressful at all, but I know I can come into my workshop and start working on something myself. There's a bunch of different reasons if we want to explore in-house manufacturing of why I found it incredibly valuable. The first would be your actual ability to design something, to have it actually represent your idea in real life. So if you can imagine a specific metal and texture and how that's going to work with another element, the computer can only help you so much. And if you work with a dial maker or another supplier and you send them your drawing, you wait 9 months for it to show up. And if it doesn't quite look like what you had imagined, it puts you in a really difficult position. And maybe it's just a tiny thing and no one else would notice. But my approach really is to seek kind of the furthest in every different facet of what I'm doing. And I find it very frustrating. Because do you wait another 9 months and correct that and spend more money, or it's not an ideal situation. So I didn't want to put myself in that potential position again. And so with the Ardea, I decided I'm just going to do it myself. The timing coincided well when I acquired my Rose engine. I was kind of in the middle of restoring it, and I didn't really have any excuses not to do it.
Was it deciding, you've talked about some of the challenges, right? Was that frustrating because, like, just logistically, or did you feel like you've talked a few times about watchmaking as a way to express yourself as a watchmaker, as even an artist, perhaps? I'm not sure if that's how you think of yourself. But was it more frustrating from that side of things, or just because you want to get the damn thing out there type of thing?
I think if I boil it all down, it's about creating an item that's the result of one person's idea. And I don't think that there's a pure way to do that than having that same person actually make the parts too.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's something very very pure about the whole experience. Like when you talk about like designing to fabrication to finishing, all these different parts, I think it becomes something a little bit different than just a watch, if I can say that.
Do you think of yourself as an artist and your watches are pieces of art?
I've been referred to that. I don't, yeah, I don't
You would
feel
never be
like
so bold. You are Canadian.
I
for
would, I
sure.
would never call myself an artist. I think watchmaking encompasses an aspect of art though. So like if we look at the profession, I consider watchmaking to be like a really beautiful blend of science, engineering, and art. And so it's maybe I'm a 30% artist or something like that.
So you released the Ardea, announced its launch in the past couple of months here in 2026. Let's talk a little bit more about that project. It sounds like you were investing in it almost as soon as you finish your last watches, the Lutria and the Paragon. Talk a little bit about like everything that went into it on the investment side of things, design, everything that sort of it encompassed.
Yeah. I mean, this was always one of my major goals, is to create something that I'm so wholly involved in or so fully involved in. And so immediately when I had some success with the Paragon and then with the Lutria, I paid myself like a barely living wage. My wife is the only reason I can do this, truly. And she's my biggest supporter and believer in my work. And I took all the money I possibly could and put it into machinery and equipment, and then just started trying different things. And every week I'd figure out something new. And I remember I told some of the early clients, like, hey, I'm going to try and make the gear train out of solid gold. I don't know if I'll be able to. That's one of my goals. And then I also want to make the numerals out of solid platinum. And there were a bunch of different technical challenges I wanted to take on. And I was able to achieve them all. But when you talk about like investment and process, I have had to be very scrappy with how I use my money. I buy a lot of broken machinery and then fix it myself. I bought my Rose engine and then I spent 3 whole months restoring it to be able to make watch dials. I am always hunting for deals. And that's because I don't have the budget of a big manufacturer. And when, like, as people place deposits on my work, that allows me to like get new equipment and new machinery and develop new processes. And it really moves the needle for me. And kind of what I was talking about earlier is like the development of the Ardea wouldn't be possible without prior support. It's an incredibly expensive process, even being efficient with your money and barely paying myself. It just takes so much work. And I understand now why big companies budget, usually millions of dollars and have a whole team to develop a movement.
Where'd you find the Rose engine?
There's a little community online of people, as you might imagine, that do engine turning or ornamental turning. And a Facebook post came up, and it was in New York State, and I called him immediately and made a deal, and then I had it shipped out here. And finding those machines is really hard. And I had another experience where my friend Darren found one on basically Kijiji or Craigslist in Arizona. And he's like, hey, you want me to go pick this up for you? I'm like, yep. And I guess I'm driving 25 hours to go pick up this machine. That one's 160 years old. It really belongs in a museum. But of all the machinery I get to use, and a big focus of mine is on the machinery. It's one of my favorite parts of the job, is being able to get to use this stuff. Those are the finest machines. The Rose engine and the straight line engine are an absolute joy to use.
The Ardea uses the Omega 30 T2 as kind of the foundation of the movement architecture.
Yeah.
Why is that movement like so beloved by watchmakers? I've heard a number of watchmakers talk about how much they like this movement. What is it about it that's so it has so much staying power?
Yeah, I think there's a few different perspectives on that. So I'll give you the first one, which is when I used to do service and when would come in, it would be a watch that had been neglected for 35 years, never serviced. And you would clean it, put it back together and put some oil on it, and it would run perfectly. And that is not the case for a lot of movements. So in terms of reliability, it's fantastic. It's a relatively low beat movement. So you have a really nice ratio of torque transmission from the barrel to the actual escapement, which means that there's not as much pressure on everything. And it's just proven. I think it's over 80 years now that it's been in production. And so obviously Omega now uses that same architecture or in the 50s in the 260 to 269 series. But it's just I also, as I understand it, it was used to have an oversized barrel and balance for the time. So it's a really proper usage of the 30 millimeter diameter. And so in terms of architecture, it was a really good base for me to start with. I didn't want to say, hey, I'm going to make my own gear train for no real purpose, especially since my first watch. Now, I do remanufacture the wheels myself out of gold, but there's like a basis for everything to work properly. So yeah, I've added my own retrograde seconds, complication on top of that, but there's a limit to how adventurous the actual engineering side of things are.
That's what I wanted to ask about next, because you've added the retrograde seconds to basically 6 o'clock on the dial. Can you talk about how to develop that type of sort of, I don't know if you refer to it as a complication, technically speaking, or not. I'm sure we could argue about that. But what's the, talk about the challenges of sort of developing a retrograde seconds like that make it more difficult than just, a standard subsidiary seconds or something.
Yeah, then I don't know if you noticed I kind of hesitated when I said complication earlier, because I think it's arguably a complication. Retrograde displays are a little bit funny that way. I mean, if you want to make the statement that a complication is like unnecessary steps to tell the time, which I tend to like, it would be, but yeah. I can see the argument both ways. Whatever it may be, what I wanted to do with the Ardea is kind of replace the traditional 6 o'clock sub-seconds with this arc of a retrograde seconds, 1 minute retrograde seconds. And the design goal was to make that not feel out of place. But still also show something I absolutely love, which is like the dynamic return of the retrograde. It's super fun to watch. It's something you get to see every minute. It's not like a perpetual calendar. We have to wait for the leap year to enjoy it. And so that was the whole design goal. And then on the engineering side, I looked at traditional designs again and kind of based the idea off that. And so it's a brass rack that runs off of a polished steel snail. There's nothing terribly complicated about it, but getting it to not impact power reserve too much is a challenge. And then also designing it so the tension is very adjustable is another big challenge as well, because you can imagine the more tension you put on the return to be quick, the more power it drains from the movement and the sooner it will stop it. So there was definitely some challenges there, but I ran a test movement for over a year and then measured the wear to make sure it was acceptable. And I was really happy with everything.
We've talked about your pursuit to do these things, more of these things in-house or in Canada in your case. Do you think buyers care about that? Or do you think it was more of a personal pursuit for you to be able to prove that you could do any number of things like on your own in your own workshop?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know. I don't know what they value. What I'm trying to do, and the reason I do in-house, is not just to say I made it. It's about having full control over the process and the flexibility that provides you in terms of designing something beautiful is really critical. And so if you want to make beautiful watches, but you have to wait months to see what it looks like in real life, that's going to be a massive obstacle in your creation process. So for me, kind of like what I was talking about earlier, only having to wait a couple weeks, or like if you had an idea, Tony, where you were like, hey, can we see what yellow gold looks like there instead of red gold?
Yeah.
In 1 week, I could show you that. And if you have to wait 6 months for that, your desire to constantly experiment and play around and just keep the whole process fun and dynamic is a challenge.
Yeah, it's interesting because like the discussion around in-house is pretty old at this point, but oftentimes like the reason you're saying why it's important is probably different than what the average consumer probably ascertains as the reason for why an in-house movement or an in-house style or something else is important. Like there's probably more related to performance or whatever it might be, but yours is more about like, especially for an independent watchmaker, it sounds like it's more about fully realizing your vision and being able to go back and forth on that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole discussion, as you're familiar with, really got skewed from ETA pulling back supply, and then a lot of manufacturers doing in-house movements where, in my opinion, they had no basis to do. I guess, of course, unless they're protecting themselves from ETA pulling back. But that conversation became this kind of thing where for a year or two, it was like in-house is the best. It's got to be in-house or it's nothing. And it got a little bit silly. But people associate in-house manufacturing having the same benefits with big companies and the small workshops like mine. And I think that's incorrect comparison. So when a big company does in-house manufacturing, it does take months. You got to set up all the machines and they own their process, and that's great. But when a workshop like mine gets a new machine that allows me to make something different or take on even more, it offers me more creative flexibility and really lets me create a better end result.
The Ardea is $62,000 in stainless steel, $82,500 in 82.5 in platinum.
Yeah.
Obviously serious money. Obviously that's, for independent watchmaker. We've been talking for a variety of reasons why that price might be the case. But I'm sure you hear it all the time. You read about it all the time. Like there's a general pushback on pricing in the world of luxury watches, whether it's big brands, independents, so on. How do you think about pricing the Ardea and how it fits into the wider world of mechanical and high-end watches?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And something I struggled with quite a bit. Because there becomes a time when you've spent so long working on something and you can get scared at a certain point and think, oh, I should charge less because like more people will be interested. And, it's really tricky to figure out how to price something. And yeah, it's finding the actual numbers that make sense is hard. And it's hard to not do some comparisons on like, what are other watches selling for and what makes sense. And I'm in the position at the end of the day where this will never make sense financially in terms of the amount of time that I put into this project and resources and energy. Small workshops like mine, the watchmakers aren't hanging out on our yachts after. If I'm really successful, I'll make a little bit more money than I've been making the past few years, but it's not the purpose. And the main goal with that pricing is kind of figuring out, like, I'm estimating I can make between 5 and 8 watches a year, covering the cost of the workshop. Ideally, another watchmaker here working with me, helping with production. And at the end of the day, like, hopefully putting a little bit more of money aside for the next, like, designing and developing of the next series. The economy of scale for small workshops is absolutely terrible. And if people want to make price comparisons with big brands, it just, and fair enough, if that's your preference, that's great. I like a lot of that stuff too. But when you talk about the actual hours of work that go into, like, I can speak on the Ardea, for example, it's incredibly high compared to a lot of stuff on the market. And then as I was talking about, like some people will value something that's like the production of one person or a small workshop, and some people won't. And that's totally fine. But it's a really good question. It's a difficult thing to think about, and you waver between wanting to go down in price and then going up in price. But so far the feedback has been I've actually priced it a little lower than I should have, especially in platinum, or at least from people who are placing orders.
I was going to ask you to zoom out a little bit because you referenced, the current independent scene earlier, and there's more and more three-hand sort of independently made watches that are finely finished. And we've talked about you've got a retrograde second. Yours is a little bit different. Price is probably a little bit lower than a lot of the ones we see. But zooming out and looking at the wider world of independent watchmakers and the plethora of three-handers out there, what do you make of the independent scene right now?
It's interesting because there's become a common dialogue that there's too many time-only independents. Initially, I agreed when I heard it. I was like, yeah, there's so many. But then I was also like, isn't this great? Like why, if a new workshop or a new engineer or watchmaker comes out with a watch, and maybe it's not to my taste, and I'm not buying in any sense, but like, you don't have to buy it, right? Like, this is, I think, a really beautiful time in watchmaking where you're seeing a lot of the smaller watchmakers or workshops actually be in a position to create something. And with the rise of social media and like online content, like your podcasts or your Substack, like there's ways to find people who are interested in your work. And like it's changed a lot.
Is there anything you'd like to see from independent watchmakers that you feel is not being pursued by all these workshops right now?
I can't think of much. I tend to be quite focused on my own work to address those needs. So like when I create the Ardea, it's the watch that I want to be in the world and how I want to express myself. Yeah, it's a good question, but I am generally overall really excited for independent watchmaking. I think it's in a really cool place. And when people talk about there being too many independents, it's kind of funny because like over the years of developing the Ardea, I saw this like massive industry sweep to like everyone selling out immediately. And even like I did one small event in New York where I took 2 deposits a couple of years ago, but I haven't traveled at all with my watch, and I have 2.5 years reserved of my work, which is amazing. Like it's been surreal it's very scary to release something like this into the world. But kind of talking on your point about too many time onlys, I think that's what a lot of people want in a watch. And then I also look at production numbers from big brands compared to, let's take the whole swath of independent watchmakers making time only watches per year. What would you estimate that production number is just from independents?
Yeah,
I know that's a hard question.
Hundreds of watches, right?
Yeah, right. Like
I'm not even like 1,000 yet.
Yeah, let's call it 1,000. Okay.
Yeah.
What's the production number of like any well-regarded watch from like Locle or Patek that's a time only and well executed and finished?
Right.
Like those.
Longa is like the lowest one, and we know they make 4,000 or 5,000 watches, whatever the number is.
Yeah. So if it means that there's like all these really cool options where you can find something special, I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and that does seem to be like what people want nowadays, like expressions of watchmaking that are still simple and wearable, and in many cases, time only. What's it actually like? You mentioned you're all alone right now, hoping to hire someone perhaps for production, but like, what's it like developing a watch all on your own? If you're trying to figure something out and you can't, who do you call? Are you going on YouTube like everyone else? What do you do?
Sometimes I wish that was a part of the job. Not that I don't watch other factory tours on YouTube and try to get ideas or other watchmakers workshops. it's also what I love about the job, and that I can't always look things up. I am not someone who often calls people for help. It's a bit of a personality flaw or benefit, as you might see it. But I try to figure it on my own, and I will really try to push that. And then eventually I'll pick up the phone and hopefully be able to call someone that might know what to do. But you're right. Like when I had to restore my Rose engine, there was no one to call. And when I have to figure out all these different processes, there's no one to call. And it can be really hard. And it can really beat you down sometimes when you spend days working on something. And then you have this one process at the end of a part that has like a 40% success rate, and you just burn up 3 days of work. That's a hard thing to get over. But I enjoy the challenge. I find watchmaking incredibly attractive because I will die long before I master all the facets of it. And my life has been kind of a story of getting involved in things, getting pretty good, buying all the gear and equipment, which is my specialty, and then I move on. And I still enjoy watchmaking so much that before I had a daughter 2 years ago, I do 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, and then I listen to a watch podcast on the way home. And I still have that same drive. Like I'm listening to watch podcasts in the workshop like yours, and I'm reading everything online, and I find the industry so fascinating, and I love it because the people who are involved generally want to be a part of it, and they're passionate.
What's your second favorite watch podcast after this one, of course?
Of course. That's a good question. I'm probably going to go with SJX on that one.
Okay, yeah. I like
Yeah, I was just listening to that before our chat. They're doing a really good job. Hodinkie's been doing a really good job. I like Open Work as well. Yeah, from the collective guys.
For the business side. Yeah.
Yeah.
I learned a lot from them for sure.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. For the Ardea, you announced it. You said 5 to 8 pieces a year, 50 pieces total available in steel or platinum. It sounds like perhaps the first year or two are already sold out, but you're still taking deposits, orders, allocations. People can submit their interest for those that are interested.
Yeah, absolutely. So if anyone wants to chat or is interested, they can reach out to me just on my website or as they see fit.
Well, thank you so much for the time, Bradley. Exciting to see everything you're doing up there in Vancouver. I appreciate you taking an hour out of your day to talk to everyone here. And thanks to everyone for listening. We'll be back with the next episode in a few weeks.